4. See Chapter 17 above. 5. See Chapter 16 above. 468. Figure 19.3a Early Stone Age, second phase, typical usually on hand axe, front and side views. 469. C. R. 5 equals asterisk J. 470. IO equals 1 centimeters. Figure 19.3 C Early Stone Age, second phase, typical usually on cleaver, front and side views. 471. Methodology and African prehistory. Point from early Acheulean, but, once this had occurred, the new techniques and the old tradition went on side by side for some time. So, in this Acheulean phase, East Africa was only one among many regions of the Old World inhabited by man. But it contains sites which have provided some of the most valuable information on both the technologies and economies of Homo erectus and early Homo sapiens. Besides rolled away with its unparalleled series of successive layers and other deposits in that region, these sites include Olergi Sali Ankara and Dusi in the Kenya Rift Valley, several deposits to the east of Lake Turkana, Nsongizi and others nearly on the Uganda-Tanzania border, Ismaila and the Kuliro in southern Tanzania and Kalambo falls on the border with Zambia. The names hand axe and cleaver for the two most typical types of Acheulean tools are of course archaeological terms of convenience. The hand axe was not an axe, it was doubtless a general-purpose tool, whose pointed end and long cutting edges could have been used for digging and skinning among other things. The cleaver with its squarish cutting end is especially suitable for skinning animals. The difference between the Old Owen and Acheulean technologies is largely one of degree. In the latter stages, both the kits and the individual tool types are more clearly differentiated. Moreover, the Acheulean techniques with more precise, more regular and more persistent flaking on both faces, executed less often with a hammer stone as in the Old Owen than with a cylindrical hammer of wood or an animal's long bone, allowed for the production of bigger tools with longer cutting edges, as well as sharper flakes for knives. Right through the early Stone Age the populations consisted of hunter-gatherer bands which moved about seasonally in the savannas and light woodlands following the fluctuating animal and vegetable food resources. Very likely they would have split up to wander at certain times and combined into bigger groups by lakes or other rich grounds towards the end of the dry season. It has been suggested that the enormous concentrations of fine Acheulean tools at such places as Ismaila and Olergi Sali could represent such annual jamborees. It is in archaeological sites containing evolved Acheulean tool kits that the first evidence of fire has been discovered in eastern Africa. In previous publications this discovery is usually placed some 50,000 or so years back. This date is almost certainly much too cautious. There is said to be good evidence of fire and cooking by Homo erectus in eastern Asia 500,000 years ago, and it seems highly likely, if so far not proven, that in Africa fire was known and roasted food enjoyed during much of the Acheulean phase. B. Middle Stone Age. The populations of the Middle Stone Age belonged to the species Homo sapiens, though maybe at first two subspecies of Homo sapiens somewhat different from modern MN. By the end of the Middle Stone Age, however, 472. The prehistory of East Africa. Not only would modern MN Homo sapiens have emerged, but the distinctive physical characteristics of the races which now exist would also have been fairly well developed in Africa as elsewhere. In technology, the Middle Stone Age saw significant advances. Figure 19.4. The basic stone tool making was no longer a matter of knifing flames off the cord until it was reduced to a reasonably standard shape with useful edges. Instead, the more complex technique of preparing the cord by precise flaking to a required shape and size, and then finally striking off the finished tool, came increasingly into use. At the same time, the technique was perfected of breaking off random flakes which were subsequently shaped by retouching. This permitted the production of smaller, more perfectly shaped and refined tools, usually thinner than those of the early Stone Age and consequently more efficient. In the second phase of the Middle Stone Age, this was followed by an innovation with far-reaching implications, the fitting of worked stone pieces into a haft of wood or other material. The leaf shaft point distinctive of the Stilby industries, neatly worked down by pressure flaking, was doubtless often embedded into a slot at the end of a wooden shaft to form a spear. MBNY domestic tools would similarly have been hafted into convenient handles. This involved not only the preparation of gums from tree resins, but also the more intricate shaping, paring and grooving of wood, no doubt also tempered in fire. Keeping pace with these technological developments of the Middle Stone Age were economic or at least environmental adjustments. There are two interrelated issues here. The first is climatic changes. 6. The details, dating handlings of changes in climate with archaeological evidence are still rather poorly known, and it would be rash to try to explain the one by facile reference to the other. Moreover, climatic changes fluctuations from drier to wetter and vice versa, which affected the expansion and contraction of the forest, the frequency and sizes of lakes and rivers and thus the distribution and richness of different food resources, were nothing new, and we must ask why climatic changes had not led to an earlier Middle Stone Age technological and economic breakthrough. At the present stage of research, this question cannot be answered satisfactorily, though one might conjecture that increasing population forced more efficient and varied ways of exploiting the environment. For, whatever the cause, this is what certainly did happen in the Middle Stone Age. Our second issue is regional specialization. MBN began to populate new territories. Throughout the world Homo sapiens was exercising his innate versatility and pushing back the boundaries of his places of settlement. In Africa there emerged the clear cultural division between the peoples of the grasslands and the more lightly wooded savannas on the one hand, and those who now penetrated the wetter and more thickly forested regions. In the former big game hunting with the spear was developed not, though, to the exclusion of gathering, whereas in the latter the collecting of vegetables. 6. See chapter 16 above. 473. U like E. U. Circumflex accent. 474. The prehistory of East Africa and fruits, fishing and water-side catching, with lances and doubtless various kinds of trap, were emphasized. In the first phase of the Middle Stone Age this regional specialization was not so extreme as if sometimes assumed. In the Kenya Highlands, close to, if not inside, the forest, tools known as foresmith have been collected. This is in many respects a refined Acheulean technique. It has the same basic range of tools, but they are generally smaller and are produced by new manufacturing techniques. In contrast to this are the more widespread Sankoan industries, the best East African examples of which occur around Lake Victoria and the western Rift Valley, in southern Uganda, Rwanda and western Tanzania. These industries are also a mixture of some Acheulean types of tool and new techniques, but the emphases are different from the foresmith type. One's first impression of Sankoan tools is their crudity, but this is probably not a sign of cultural retrogression but a more varied technological activity. For many of these crude-looking implements were most likely tools with which to make other tools, especially of wood, while the heavy picks would have been useful for digging up roots which were part of the woodland diet. The Sankoan industries are first encountered in East Africa in a developed form, and this suggests that their origin and evolution from an Acheulean source occurred somewhere else, to the center or west of the continent. It is possible that they were introduced into the westerly parts of East Africa during a wet period when the equatorial forest extended its bounds. But this point might be over-argued. It is likely that campsites were in woodlands and forested watersides rather than in the densest continuous forest. It is noticeable that in the Zaire Basin the distribution of recorded Sankoan sites shows barely more penetration into the equatorial forest than had occurred in Acheulean times. However, in the second phase of the Middle Stone Age the makers of the Lukemban industries, which were essentially evolved and refined forms of the Sankoan and which were famous for their exquisitely fashioned stone lance heads, belonged more decidedly to the forest and its waters. The Lukemban is also found around Lake Victoria and other westerly parts of East Africa as well as in the Zaire Basin, contrasting with the stony eve of the high grasslands bordering the Rift Valley with its leaf-shaped spear points. In other regions, notably southeastern Tanzania, there prevail different types of Middle Stone Age industries, less distinctive or rather awaiting proper classification. Some of these may have a general Sankoan Lukemban appearance. But probably there were a number of regional traditions, whose origins may be explained as adjustments to local environments, but which, once entrenched, would have maintained many of their distinctive characteristics for reasons of cultural attachment as much as environmental or economic pressures. Such regional cultural factors have an important bearing on the variability which is evident in East Africa once late Stone Age technological innovations were adopted. 475. Methodology and African prehistory. C. Late Stone Age e.e. 10 to 20,000 years ago. These even more intricate techniques of stone tool manufacture became common. Instead of the Middle Stone Age emphasis on producing flakes from prepared cores, the main concentration in the Late Stone Age was on blades, striking or indirectly punching long, delicate, parallel-sided pieces from a suitable stone. Figure 19.5. Such blades could then be trimmed or retouched for a variety of shapes and purposes. Usually the trimmed pieces were very small, microliths, sometimes less than a centimeter in length. A common form is one which archaeologists called a crescent or lunate with a straight sharp cutting edge and curved blunted back. These were designed, not for holding and use as a complete instrument in the hand, but for hafting and gluing into handles of bone and wood. Hafting was now an evolved and regular practice. Frequently, moreover, several microliths would be fixed together in sequence slotted into a wooden handle to make a composite tool, such as a knife or saw. In regions where the stone was suitable for blade production, notably chert or better still the opaque volcanic glass obsidian which occurs in places close to the Rift Valley in northern Tanzania and Kenya, beautiful crescents, backed blades, balls, burins for grooving, scrapers and other distinctive tools could be manufactured. But there were other regions where only quartz or some inferior type of stone with less regular flaking properties was available. Though efficient tool kits were made from these, the first impression they give is of crudity and irregularity. Sometimes archaeologists recover thousands of quartz flakes and chips in a late Stone Age living site, but only 2 or 3% of them can be classified as recognizable tool shapes. On the basis of these technological innovations, the number of cultural and economic ones can be recognized or deduced. It was probably at this period that the bow and arrow began to be used in hunting. 1 or 2 microliths could be fixed at the end of the wooden shaft of an arrow to make a point, and others placed farther down could serve as barbs. The preparation of poisons to tip such arrows probably dates back to these times. This, as well as the use of nets in wooded areas, is suggested by the practices of existing or recent hunter-gatherer populations among which some of the late Stone Age traditions are maintained. Bone was doubtless put to more uses, and the recognition of awls from both bone and stone is an indication that skins were sewn, either for clothing or for tentage. Beads made of seeds, bone, ostrich eggshell and, in time, of stone may have been sewn onto such clothing or strung to make necklaces. Grindstones, which occur in some late Stone Age series, were used for crushing red ochre but probably served the more basic economic purpose in pounding vegetable foods. Some late Stone Age camps were in open country by streams or lakes, where wind breaks or huts made of poles, grass and possibly skin covers have to be imagined. Also common at this time was the occupation of rock shelters, sometimes inaccurately described as caves. These natural shelters 476 are .l centimeters. Figure 19.5 Late Stone Age, thumbnail scraper top backed blade left and crescent right made from obsidian in the Kenya Rift Valley. All methodology and African prehistory were found below cliffs, along valley sides or under enormous granite rocks, wherever sufficient protection from the rain and prevailing wind could be provided without unduly restricting the light. Some rock shelters were usefully placed on eminences from which the movement of game on wide areas of plain could be watched. Here a hunting party could make an overnight stop, or a family or group of families could set up base for a season. Some favorite shelters were resorted to year after year, or at least at intervals over hundreds or even thousands of years of the late Stone Age. Hence layers upon layers of rubbish found, usually consisting of ashes from cooking, bones of the animals eaten, stone tools and waste. In one region of north-central Tanzania, the rock walls at the rear of many of these rock shelters were, as noted above, decorated with paintings of animals, hunting scenes and other designs. While it is rarely possible to connect individual paintings with particular layers in the late Stone Age sequence represented in the shelters, the general connection between the two is perfectly clear. It is likely, moreover, that most of the surviving art belongs to recent millennia, towards the end of the late Stone Age, some of it overlapping with the period of the spread of Iron Age communities. The origin of this hunter art, and the beliefs and cosmology behind it, must, however, be much more ancient. The likelihood of an ancient fund of tradition, stretching back many millennia to the beginning of the Late Stone Age if not to the Middle Stone Age, may account for the general similarities which exist between the Tanzanian hunter art and that of southern Africa. Similarly, the lithic industries of the two regions, though by no means identical, share some general features often loosely described as Wilton. In southern Africa it has been demonstrated that some late examples of the rock art, and indeed of the Wilton stone industries, were the work of groups some of whom still lead a hunter-gatherer life in certain regions. Their San physical features and Khoisan or click languages are both distinctive. In East Africa there is only one small region where click languages are spoken, and this is the very region of the north-central Tanzanian rock art. These Khoisan speakers, besides betraying some possible evidence of San physical ancestry, still retain a very strong hunter-gatherer cultural tradition. 7. This certainly cannot be explained as a result of a relatively recent migration of San out of southern Africa. Rather, there must once have been a continuum of such hunter-gatherers from northern Tanzania to the Cape of Good Hope, a continuum broken by the arrival in the region during the last 3,000 years of peoples with different languages, cultures and pastoral or agricultural economies. The origins of this cultural continuum in the savannas of eastern and southern Africa clearly belong well back in the Late Stone Age, if not with the still the phase of the Middle Stone Age. However, the question of time depth must be left open until this second phase of the Middle Stone Age, as well as the transition to Late Stone Age with the 7th. See Chapter 11 above. 478. The prehistory of East Africa. Inadequately defined Mangosian industries is better recognized and understood in the intervening regions. This notion of a long tradition for the savanna cultures of the Late Stone Age may account for some of the regional variability contained in the general category of Wilton industries. In this category archaeologists have in the past tended to include almost all industries in both eastern and southern Africa with a marked microlithic element, and it may be that some of these, in the more northerly parts of East Africa, are related in only a very tenuous way and may have nothing to do with the sand populations of the south. In the westerly parts of East Africa, moreover, one might expect to find a distinct tradition connected with the Zaire Basin where Chitolean industries flourished, derived from the Sanko-Lupemban woodland and forest culture of the Middle Stone Age. But this is not especially evident, except in Rwanda. The HE1 region, which contains some strikingly contrasting features, lies in the Kenya Highlands and Rift Valley. Here are found some Late Stone Age industries with Wilton affinities, but also others in which tools made on long blades rather than microliths predominate. These, known as Chemicapsian, made from local obsidian sources, date from between about 10 before our era and 5000 before our era. The HE best series is that which D. Charlie Key found at Gamble's Cave near Makaru in the 1920s. Related or derived industries continued until the very end of the Stone Age. This Chemicapsian belongs to an older blade tradition widespread over much of northeastern Africa and the Mediterranean region. But the comparison of the lithic industry is not the only consideration which matters. More important, the Chemicapsian and its makers represent the southwestern extremity of the Negro aquatic civilization which extended right across Africa in the southern Saharan belt and the Nile Valley to East Africa. These areas appear to have been occupied during a temporary wet period in which lake levels were high and rivers swollen. This civilization was at its zenith about 7000 before our era. The riparian peoples caught fish and aquatic animals with typical bone spears and harpoons manufactured with stone tools. They are found at Lake Edward in the western Rift Valley and on the former shoreline of Lake Nakuru. Basket and pottery making was known, and the latter represented one of the earliest uses of pottery firing anywhere in the world. This all points to a sedentary society with the principal habitat situated at the water's edge. The HE Neolithic only a few years ago, for want of archaeological evidence, stock raising and, above all, agriculture were regarded as not having been very advanced prior to the first millennium, except in the sites along the Nile Valley related to the Khartoum Neolithic. It is still a matter of speculation whether the fishermen groups which were partly sedentary living beside the Great Lakes and rivers. 479. Methodology and African prehistory. From the 7th and 6th millennia onwards were at the origin of pastoralism, and perhaps also of agriculture. This change in their way of life was due partly to the pressures exerted by the environment, the sudden increase in the drying up of the Sahara from the beginning of the third millennium, and partly to their advanced technology, since, as we know, they already had pottery. However, it is thought that these people were receptive to the notion of collective food production, particularly of animal and plant domestication, which was to spread throughout the region from the third millennium onwards and to soften the impact of the change of climate on natural resources. The best known site from this period is Eshahainig, in the Sudan, which is situated on an old terrace slightly to the north of the confluence of the Blue and White Niles. In addition to the discovery there of a lithic industry consisting of geometrical microliths, H.J. Arkell found harpoons perforated at the base and fish hooks made of shells, both of which testify to the existence of fishing as a permanent activity, rhyolite adzes, gouges, small polished bone axes, and pottery with a wavy lined and dotted decorative motif. The bone remains included wild species, many of them fish, but also goats and occasionally sheep. The Eshahainig site dates from the second half of the 4th millennium. At the Cairo site, which is located nearby and is very similar in the type of material discovered, 9/10 of the remains collected are from domesticated species, including members of the Bovidae family. At Agordat in the Eritrea province of Ethiopia, traces have been found of 4 villages which were inhabited on a semi-permanent basis. Although study has been confined to the surface layers, the site has produced axes, polished stone hammers, stone discs and bracelets, pottery with an embossed or grooved herringbone pattern, pearls, lip ornaments and necklaces. The presence of grinding stones, mortars and a stone figurine representing a cattle species similar to those raised by the C group populations centered on Nubia and in the west does not necessarily prove that there was an agricultural and pastoral economy, but suggests that there might have been. In the Gadabra sheltered near Aksum dating from the 3rd millennium, grains of the Heluzan Korakna variety of millet have been found in conjunction with a geometrical microlith industry and pottery. No trace has yet been found in Ethiopia of the ancient cultivation of TDF Urobrostes TDF, which is still the staple and highly nutritious cereal consumed by many ethnic groups in northern Ethiopia, or of the Abyssinian banana Hansate Agdul, which is more widespread in the south, or of wheat or barley. In Kenya, although evidence of the existence of agriculture is still lacking, there are ample vestiges of pastoralism throughout the Rift Valley as far down as Tanzania, as well as in the highlands. These vestiges are found either in burial places, such as the cremation sites at the Njiro River Cave near Nakuru and the Kranget Cave near Molo, or in the cairn-covered grave in the Ngorongoro crater in northern Tanzania, where the skeleton is. 480. The prehistory of East Africa. In the folded position, all these sites provide a range of archaeological artifacts such as grinding stones and pounders, or else of settlement sites, such as Crescent Island near Lake Naivasha and Narojara in southern Kenya. At Narojara, 95% of the fauna identified are of domestic animals and consist of 57% goats and sheep and 39% cattle. A study of the bone remains has shown that large animals were slaughtered when they reached old age, while goats and sheep were killed when they were much younger. The conclusion we can draw is that cattle were raised more for their milk, and perhaps for their blood, as among the present-day Maasai, than for their meat. Here, again, the presence of grinding stones and pounders are only indirect evidence for the existence of some kind of agriculture. The introduction of pastoralism and agriculture, which were very frequently linked in a mixed economy, has often been presented, in the case of East Africa, as being the outcome of 2 influences, one flowing from what is now the southern Sahara towards the Sudanese region, and the other from Egypt towards Nubia Khartoum. The process of Neolithization may have reached the Ethiopian highlands and then been carried southwards by small-scale movements of Chalchidic-speaking peoples. However, as is often the case, the change to a production economy was gradual, and the archaeological evidence shows that the existing substratum continued to play an important economic and technological role. Hunting and fishing went on as in the past, and there was no break in continuity with the material culture of the small fishermen groups which had become partly sedentary well before the 3rd millennium, or even with the hunter-gatherers, who did not know the use of pottery. The Kenyan Capsianalmentation. While there is as yet little evidence that agriculture was very advanced, it is known to have existed, and the raising of sheep, followed by goats and cattle, developed very rapidly from the 3rd millennium onwards and above all during the 2nd millennium. When the Iron Age began, these East African peoples had probably already advanced beyond the pre-agricultural stage. 6. For example, Pseudo-Lavalois, Proto-Lavalois, Lavalois, Teshanjite and Coman. Cm. W. Brizalon, La Denomination de Objets de Pierre Folly, Gallia Préhistoire, Sutto. IV Paris pages 79 to 96 and 101 to 2. 504. Prehistory in Southern Africa. Composition of the industries and in the nature of the habitat and its resources, there is a certain broad patterning common to the Acheulean as a whole which suggests that the overall way of life did not vary greatly from one end of the Handax world to the other. The general picture of Middle Pleistocene hominid behavior that emerges is thus one of hunting and gathering groups with a generally similar lifestyle and the ability to communicate moderately efficiently. They were living in larger groupings than in earlier times and paying more regular visits to favored sites, following an established seasonal pattern. The social structure must still have been an open one, allowing for free movement of individuals and ideas. Large areas of the continent, however, including the forests, remained unoccupied, and the sparseness, in absolute terms, of the overall population, must have meant that each group probably lived fairly isolated from the next. The final Acheulean or forest myth. Certain assemblages have for long been known to exist on the high interior plateau. They are characterized by generally smaller sized and well-made hand axes, a wide range of flame tools, coarse scrapers and comparatively few cleavers, and are probably, but not certainly, later in time than the Acheulean that we have been considering. If this is so, then these assemblages probably represent the final stage of the hand axe tradition. Most of the assemblages are, however, surface collections and for that reason may be mixed with later material. The raw material used was generally lydianite indurated shale in the regions where that rock abounds, but elsewhere quartzite was more commonly used. There are only a very small number of excavated samples of these assemblages which may, perhaps, be taken as representative. One of these lies in a former pan at Ruidham west of Kimberley where the industry is contained within some 5 meters of sediments capped by a massive step lime. These sediments represent the steady accumulation of colluvial fill deposited by rainwash. The bifaces are sometimes diminutive and rather poorly made, and the greater number of tools are small scrapers and other small, retouched artifacts all in lydianite. In this assemblage, the method of core preparation known as disc core technique, yielding several small flakes, is well represented, while another technique, the Lavalois, yielding one larger flake to each preparation of the core, appears to be absent. Other sealed sites on the Vaal River near Windsorten and in the Verbertium area on the Orange River preserve a similar industry but with both Lavalois and disc core techniques present. It would, therefore, seem that traditional usage and perhaps other factors, as well as time, may be a partial explanation for this kind of variability in flake and core forms. These industries have been termed forestsmith after the locality in the Orange Free State where the characteristic almond-shaped hand axes were. 50s. Methodology and African prehistory. First found on the surface in large quantities. It remains unclear, however, whether these industries represent an entity sufficiently distinct from the Acheulean to warrant the retention of a specifically distinctive name. They are more usually found in the grasslands, Karoo bush and Makia of South Africa and Namibia. The only indication of their possible age island at uranium/thorium date on the carbonate from Ruidham, which gave a determination of 115000 plus 10000 years B. Page 7. The time when forestsmith industries were superseded by a new technological complex or tradition emphasizing flame and blade tools and marking the beginning of the Middle Stone Age is unknown but may have been between 100,000 and 80,000 years ago. In the heavier rainfall, more closed vegetation regions of Central Africa, the late Acheulean was replaced, not by the forestsmith, but by industrial entities with a high proportion of heavy-duty equipment, picks, core axes, choppers and core scrapers. This kind of equipment was present, of course, in Acheulean assemblages but, except in the little-known heavy-duty variant, that never at that time predominated over the other categories of tools. Such heavy-duty equipment now becomes significant, however, in the areas of higher rainfall and temperature where it is found together with a range of light-duty tools made of flakes and fragments. Such occurrences are found in Zambia, Zimbabwe, parts of Southeast Africa in particular on the Mozambique Plain and in the coastal regions of Natal, and belong to what is termed the Sangoan industrial complex. Sangoan assemblages are mostly undated except in the relative stratigraphy way, and it is not known for certain whether they are broadly contemporary with or later than the final Acheulean foresmith of the open grass savanna lands. At the Kalambo Falls, the local manifestation of the Sangoan chipita industry is dated, on 12 radiocarbon results, to between 46,000 and 38,000 years BP. A comparable stage from Mufo in northeastern Angola dates from about 38,000 years BP. In Zimbabwe, the local Sangoan pelo industry resembles, but is believed to be older than, assemblages at one time described as proto-Stilbe. 8th difficulty of correlation of these Sangoan-like industries is compounded by ecological and other factors for, where habitat, tradition or idiosyncratic considerations together favored the use of this heavy-duty equipment, it can be expected at an early stage to have become significant and to have remained so, as long as the underlying reasons for its use persisted. The He correlation of this toolkit with higher 7 BP equals before present, this being 1950. The year in which the carbon-14 method was used for the first time. 8. The composition of these proto-Stilbe assemblages in Zimbabwe can best be seen from sealed cape sites such as Pomangwe and Bombita and from an opened site on the Cheduma Plateau, after which the industrial entity has now been renamed the Cheduma Industry. Although no finite dates are available, the Cheduma industry is older than 42,000 BP, so that the pelo industry is thought to be still earlier. 506. KIMBER LEYDOIROOIDAM circumflex accent GIS. Degrees greater than UMFOLOSI. FAURESMITHSO./TUGELA mouth. 0 FAURESMITH. SANGOAN. 1000 kilometers _, greater than. Figure 20.6. The distribution of foresmith and Sangoan sites in southern Africa after J.D. Clark, 1Q70. 507. Methodology and African prehistory. Rainfall, thicker vegetation areas is undeniable, so that it is more meaningful to look upon such heavy-duty elements as being ecologically induced than as representing a particular time period or cultural stage in an evolutionary development of stone tool equipment. Similarly, since these Sangoan elements can be shown to be associated with more closed vegetation patterns, it might be expected that the earlier occurrences would, in such regions, be contemporary with the final stages of the Acheulean the foresmith in the grass savannas, and that they would be absent from the more open habitats where the emphasis would, as we have seen, be on other kinds of equipment. Industries of Sangoan type have been described from Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola and North and Southeast South Africa. In the foresmith and Sangoan, therefore, we can detect the beginnings of regional specialization in tool kits reflecting different adaptive patterns in the grasslands from those in the woodlands and forests. The Middle Stone Age need to look upon the stone equipment, usually all that remains, of prehistoric and as the product of the immediate needs and activities of the makers and not as the tool kits of necessarily genetically and ethnically distinct populations becomes particularly apparent in relation to the varied components of the regional assemblages during what has for long been known as the Middle Stone Age. Designation of an assemblage as belonging to the Middle Stone Age was based essentially on the presence of certain technical and typological features and on the ability to show that stratigraphically it belonged between the early and the late Stone Ages. Such developmental, chronostratigraphic terms have little meaning today, however, as they remain as ill-defined as when they were first used. Moreover, radiocarbon chronology is showing that technological stages such as were postulated in these concepts are more conjectural than real, and that techniques and the tool types that were their end products transcend such artificial horizontal boundaries. Working closely with stone artifacts, as he does, the prehistorian sometimes tends to overlook the fact that these are merely the sole remaining part of an extensive range of equipment and materials that have not survived. Had these been available for study, however, they would surely have dramatically modified our conceptions of prehistoric technology. Moreover, wherever the need exists, technologies change in response to new pressures and the adaptive, selective exploitation pattern of a group. Both these facts must be taken into account when making any assessment of the stone industries that represent cultural behavior patterns during later Pleistocene and Holocene times. Sometime between Iowa and 80,000 years ago, the sea level began to drop from the 5 to 12 meter height stand that is well represented by the raised beach remnants at a number of localities round the southern shores of the 508. Figure 20.7 Artifacts from Sangoan assemblages in the Zambezi Valley, near Livingstone, Zambia after J. D. Clark, 1951 and 2. Picks, 3 and 8. Corn axes, 4. Disc corn, 5 and 6. Modified flakes, 7. Spheroid, 509. Methodology and African prehistory. Continent 9 and, shortly after this time, MEN began to occupy favored localities on the recently abandoned beaches. Some of these localities were capes and there is a generally similar, though individually distinctive, pattern to the technology of this time both in the Mediterranean basin and in southern Africa. The onset of the last glacial period in the northern hemisphere was accompanied in the tropics by lower temperatures, perhaps about 6-8 degrees C lower, and drier conditions, though decreased evaporation rates ensured a regular and even, perhaps, more extensive supply of surface water than there is today. At the same time, the semi-arid climate that then obtained in the basin of the Zaire in the equatorial region greatly restricted the evergreen forest or replaced it with grassland and woodland, and so presented a highly favorable habitat for MVN and gregarious game animals. Populations now began to move into this previously largely unoccupied country. Similarly, during the later Pleistocene, the Namib Desert, also today so inhospitable, was occupied by bands of hunters who left their equipment at the campsites. The stratigraphy sequence in each major region during the Middle Stone Age appears to show a consistent pattern of technological development from less elaborate to more evolved end products, and, in general, the artifacts also show a progressive diminution in size. However, the cultural sequence in one region is not necessarily comparable with that in another, although some overall trends and patterns can be traced. MENY factors, ecological, technological and social, were probably responsible for the regional variability that is characteristic of these upper Pleistocene industries. Different ways of life required different sets of tools or dictated different uses to which tool kits could be put, and, although continent-wide developments in technology might have played a part in determining the time at which any seemingly new trait was introduced, it is likely to have been the nature of the resources and the traditional methods of their exploitation that were the deciding factors as to whether and when any new technological trait was accepted and adapted. The underlying techniques of this time were the levallois and disc cord methods for manufacturing flanks, and the production of blades at first by direct percussion and later by means of a punch. The flanks and blades were made into a range of light-duty equipment that was retouched into points, scrapers, knives, burins, chisels, barrers, and a number of other types of tool. In southern Africa, these regional entities can be grouped, on the basis of technology, into three major units, that are in large part, but not entirely, also chronological units. For this reason they can best be referred to as groups or phases rather than stages, which imply a chronological relationship. 9. This last high stand is believed to be the equivalent of the last interglacial and high sea level in the Mediterranean basin, where it is usually found at a comparable level, between 6 and 8 meters. Prehistory in southern Africa. The first of these groups or phases, Group I, is characterized by large, radially prepared flanks made by the levallois method and eye-long blades struck by direct percussion. Only a few discrete assemblages are known. Degrees at the few sites where a stratified evolutionary sequence exists. The technically more evolved occurrences are found in the overlying strata, and the Group I assemblages are the earliest, e.g. at the Cave of Hearts and the Kalambo Falls, but there appears to be no chronological consistency between the different regions. For example, the Middle Stone Age I at Classes River is believed to be close to 80,000 years old, while the Nakasasa industry at the Kalambo Falls, on the other hand, dates between c. 39,000 and 30,000 years BP. The other assemblages have not yet been found in datable contexts. Other assemblages that belong to the earlier part of the Upper Pleistocene, that is, before 40,000 years BP, but do not fall into Group I, show a different set of characteristics. For instance, an industry of informal flakes, core scrapers, polyhedrals, anvils and grindstones in dolerite comes from peat I Flores Bad in the Orange Free State. These tools are largely undiagnostic and may well not represent the full range of equipment being made at the site at this time, but it is also possible that a single, long, trimmed blade might be associated. Peat I also yielded what appears to be the grip end of a curved wooden throwing stick and a fragmentary hominid cranium. This Flores Bad horizon dates from more than 48,000 years BP. Another industry that differs from but is probably contemporary with those in Group I is the Chaduma industry from Zimbabwe, referred to above as being older than 42,000 years BP. It is characterized by picks and rare hand axes and an important light-duty element comprising, amongst other tools, points, scrapers and utilized blades. It is made from a variety of raw materials: chalcedony, opaline breccia, quartzite, quartz, and so on. The industry from Twin Rivers in Zambia, dated to 22,800 plus minus 1,000 years BP, resembles that from Chaduma, although the date, if correct, emphasizes that basic technological method is NOW of little value as a means of correlating assemblages between regions. MENY assemblages from both caves and surface sites fall into a second group of industries, Group II. They date generally between about 40,000 and 20,000 years BP, but may sometimes continue later, as, for example, on 10. The Lower Petersburg from Bed 4 in the Cave of Hearts, Macapan, the Middle Stone Age I from immediately above the 6 to 8 meter beach in Classy's River mouth, an open site in the Orange River scheme area Eland Kloof, and one in the Central Transvaal Road OS Rand. In addition, the Nakasa industry from the Calibo Falls is characterized by similar forms, although it also has certain bifacial, heavy-duty tools such as we have seen are to be expected with entities from the Brachystegia woodlands. 11. Examples of Group II assemblages are those from Bed 5 in the Cave of Hearts, from Bed I at Ambialu's Cave in the Transvaal, the Middle Stone Age II from Classy's River, assemblages from Mussel Bay and Skilder Gap Cave in the Southern Cape, and the Stilby industry from MBW Cave in Zambia. T/IKAKONTWENACHIKUFUY Broken Hill MBWA Owishio MRIMB 0 Vertical Line NYNGA Ofindra Ohora Cave of Hearts //TUINPELAADS BOSK OPCASIMITIZE FJNGWADU The Mayo to GFL or ISBAD MODDR circumflex accent PC underscore CKRRIDENDHOFMBYR greater than vertical line SOPOFU / cock bayfish hook Cape Flats. The ATJIE circumflex accent, then NNK, Hardy VRG / East LONDON and Wilton. Upper Pleistocene fossil man sites 0 Some post Pleistocene fossil man sites 0 liters underscore 1000 kilometers underscore J. Figure 20.8 Upper Pleistocene and some post-Pleistocene fossil man sites in southern Africa after J.D. Clark, 1970. 512. Prehistory in southern Africa. The South Coast. These industries are characterized by varying use of the disc core and levallois techniques, in particular for the production of triangular flakes, and by an important blade element. Blades and triangular flakes, made predominantly from quartzite and lidionite, or COMMON in the winter rainfall areas south of the Great Escarpment, in southwest Africa and on the Hiveldi in the Orange Free State and Transvaal. Retouch or trimming on these Group II tools is never extensive. It is usually confined to the margins and not infrequently takes the form of deniculation. In the tropical woodlands north of Limpopo, where quartz was more generally used, the emphasis was on shorter flakes worked into various scraper and other forms with similar, restricted retouch. The small but significant part of the toolkit here is composed of heavy-duty tools, occasioned, it is believed, by more extensive use of wood and its byproducts. A third group of industries Group II 12 ranges in age from about 35,000 to about 15,000 years BP and is distinguished by many more extensively retouched artifacts. Scraper retouch is semi-invasive and strangulated forms are not uncommon. Filiate points may be retouched over the whole of one or both faces. Bars and upper grindstones are characteristic. In general, the tools have smaller dimensions and show a refinement in retouch that is not found in the earlier groups. In addition to the three groups just described, there is a fourth group IV that shows some significant differences from them. This is what used to be known as the Magosian or Second Intermediate Complex. It combines an evolved and often diminutive expression of the disc core and levallois techniques with the manufacture of delicate, often ribbon-like blades struck from cores by means of a punch of bone, horn or hardwood. The raw materials selected were often cryptocrystalline rocks and foliate and triangular points, side and end scrapers made from these, often by the Dixie or and levallois methods, are finely finished, sometimes, it is believed, by pressure flaking. With these, more traditionally Middle Stone Age, tools are found others made on blades and blade segments, often of diminutive proportions, that have been blunted, or backed, or utilized and trimmed in various ways, as well as several burin or chisel-like tools, notably the carronaded or polyhedral form. This type of assemblage appears to be restricted to certain parts of the subcontinent, to Zimbabwe and Zambia, the Eastern Free State, the Southern Cape Province and parts of Namibia, for example, but it is apparently absent from most of the central portion of the interior plateau where lydianite was the main raw material used. If such a distribution has an ecological basis, it behoves us to try to determine what there was in COMMON between the regions where these Group IV industries are found. It used to be considered that these evolved industries represented a fusion of Middle Stone Age prepared core and Upper Paleolithic punch blade 12. The Upper Petersburg industry from the Cave of Hearts and Imvialu's Cave or the Border Cave in Natal, the upper part of the Stilme from Pierce Cave at the Cape, the Bombada industry from the Cape sides and from Kami in Zimbabwe are examples. 513. Die circumflex accent %pounds circumflex accent Z. Figure 20.9 tools J. The Petersburg and Bombada industries from the Cave of Hearts, Transvaal, and Bombada Cave, Zimbabwe, typical of the open thorn bush and Bushveld country after J. D. Clark, 1970. SM. Prehistory in Southern Africa. Technologies and that they were probably not much older than 15,000 to 20,000 years BP. And, indeed, the number of age determinations fall within this range. More recently, however, several much older ages 13 have been obtained for Group IV industries, those which had been termed Magosian or, in South Africa, Hauiacen's core after the site near Grahamstown where the first characteristic assemblage was found. Unfortunately, with the exception of Montague Cave at the Cape and the Changulan industry from Zimbabwe, no detailed information on the composition of these occurrences is yet available, so that it is uncertain whether each of these assemblages is homogeneous or whether more than one industrial entity is represented. Assuming for the present that the assemblages are homogeneous, these early dates now show that a developed blade technology was present in southern Africa contemporaneously with prepared blade technologies of traditional Middle Stone Age. The situation is not dissimilar from that in North Africa where two contemporaneous industrial complexes, the Daban and the Atiran, are found regionally differentiated. Changes and replacements of stone tool kits have, in the past, usually been explained by postulating movements of genetically discrete ethnic populations. This migration hypothesis finds little or no support from other lines of evidence, however, and the extent to which tool kits were adopted and spread among hunting-gathering populations is more likely to have been dependent upon any advantages or superiority they possessed over the traditional equipment, especially where the exploitation of new resources was thereby facilitated. Long-distance migration, unless it involves the occupation of entherogens such as the NEW world or the Zaire Basin and West African forest zones after the end of the Middle Pleistocene, is probably minimal at the hunting-gathering level and relates more particularly to food-producing populations. Independent invention among fairly isolated communities in regions using similar resources and similar exploitation methods is a more probable explanation for the changes exhibited by contemporaneous tool kits which can better be explained as stimulus to fusion than as due to wide-scale ethnic migration. By way of explanation, it is necessary to review briefly the fossil evidence from southern Africa after the end of the Acheulean with which the Saldanha skull is believed to be associated. Since the skull from KBWE Broken Hill so closely resembles that from Saldanha, it is likely that they were not separated by any very great interval of time. The small number of 13 Group IV industries have been dated at Montague Cave 2, 23,200 greater than 48,850 at Classes River, in the Southern Cape Province. Dates clustered round ± 36,000 BP. At Rose Cottage Cave in the Orange Free State the date is over 50,000 and over 46,300 for the AP Petersburg that border Cave. The regional Group IV industry in Zimbabwe the Chambulan, dates between 21,700 plus 780 and 25,650 plus minus 1,800 years BP. 515. Methodology and African prehistory. Light-duty artifacts and the spheroids from Kabwe, believed to be associated with the hominid fossils, are undiagnostic and might belong in time anywhere between a late Acheulean and an early Middle Stone Age. Stratified occupation horizons ascribed to this time range are present at the immediate locality so that, while it may be suspected that this virtually complete scope and other remains are representative of the kind of hominid responsible for the local Songoan or final Acheulean, this cannot be proved to be so until some more precise method of dating the fossil itself is devised. Since, however, there are resemblances between the Saldanha and Kabwe Broken Hill fossils, the fragmentary cranium H.12 from Bed IV at the Oldaway Gorge and that from Enherasi in the Lake Iasi Rift in East Africa, it would seem that these rhodoceoid and related forms of Homo sapiens replaced H. erectus during the later part of the Middle Pleistocene, as did Neanderthal MBN in Eurasia and, by the beginning of the Upper Pleistocene, were widely spread within the tropical parts of sub-Saharan Africa. 14. The climatic changes which pollen, limnological and other studies are showing took place in Africa at the same time as those accompanying the last glaciation in Eurasia, and the general sparseness and near isolation of the hominid populations, can be expected to have brought about changes and development in several different directions as the hominids became more efficiently adapted genetically and culturally to the several diverse environments which they now successfully occupied. Whatever were the causes, full language, improved social structure, advanced technology, or others, that gave modern man sapiens such an undeniable advantage over the other hominid forms, it is clear that they lie behind the genetic interchange which resulted in the comparatively rapid replacement of the Neanderthaloid, rhodoceoid and other less well-adapted forms. Modern man represented by the skulls from the Kibish Formation in the lower Ombo Basin and from the Lake Victoria Basin at Kantara was present in East Africa by about 200,000 years BP. In South Africa, the skull from Flores Bad, which is more than 48,000 years old, represents an early, robust form close to modern man. The number of later but, as yet less securely dated fossils, most of them probably falling within the 35,000 to 20,000 BP time range from Boskop, Border Cave, Twin Plots, Skilder Gap, Piers Cave, Mumbwa and elsewhere represent more than one regionally differentiated and early modern population, responsible for one or other of the Middle Stone Age cultural variants. By the end of the Pleistocene, about 10,000 years ago, genetically related but regionally distinct populations, ancestral to some of the present-day peoples, had become differentiated. The large and small Bushman stock in South Africa and East Central Africa, the negroid in Equatorial and West Africa, and the Nilotic form in East Africa. The HE fossil evidence is fragmentary and usually confined to a single specimen. Rarely are there 14 NEW racemization determinations for two of the Kabwe hominid fossils fall between 100,000 and 200,000 years BP. J. Bada, Personal Communication. 516. Prehistory in Southern Africa. Sufficient individuals in a sample to give much indication of the range of variation that can be expected within any one population. It is none the less clear, however, that the indigenous African races have a very considerable antiquity in the continent, where they may be seen as having evolved during the Upper Pleistocene and earliest Holocene by means of a long period of adaptation and selection in the major biogeographical regions. As stated above, the punch blade element and various small, backed and truncated blade tools found with the group IV Hauiason's core toolkits have in the past been identified as evidence of population movements, with the further implication that these kits were introduced by immigrant groups of modern man. Whether this ethnic hypothesis will later be substantiated, or whether these toolkits reflect the acceptance of new techniques transmitted by stimulus diffusion and adopted because they permitted more efficient exploitation of the favored local resources, or whether, again, they are the products of quite other factors, must await the outcome of more definitive studies of the excavated sites. There can be little doubt, however, that whatever the cause, the introduction of the small or microblade technology is related to the development of the composite tool in which two or more parts and/or materials are combined to make an improved, more efficient implement. Hafting stone or other material for more effective use probably begins during Group II times, and the fluting scars on the dorsal faces of the muscle bay points for the removal of the platform by retouch on the ventral face of an artifact are believed to be evidence of modification associated with hafting. The most readily available medium for mounting, for example, the stone knife or projectile point, in Africa is likely to have been various forms of mastic resin, gum, latex, and so on with binding where necessary of sinew or bast. The appearance of modern MBN in the prehistoric record is associated with a series of innovative cultural practices and traits. The deep, accumulated sediments in caves and rock shelters and in some stratigraphically favored open sites show that regular seasonal occupation was the general rule from this time onwards. We appear to be dealing with much more closely structured groups, though clearly these were still open and their composition is likely to have changed frequently. The multiplicity and standardization of different types of tool, intentional burial and the placing of artifacts and food with the dead for use in the afterlife, the employment of pigment for decoration and possibly ritual, even the liking for music is represented in North Africa. These are all indications of the immeasurably superior genetic advantages of sapiens. One aspect of the more regionally specialized nature of the toolkits can be seen in regional preferences for certain kinds of game animals and the increasing use being made of certain plant foods, the processing of which required grinding and pounding. Grinding equipment makes its first regular appearance with the Group II and IV occurrences and more particularly after about 25,000 before our era. The significant heavy-duty 517 methodology and African prehistory component accompanies the light-duty tools in North and Northwest Zambia and reflects a similar exploitation pattern of much the same kind of resources as those in the Zaire Basin and Angola. The traditional view of the Middle Stone Age as being composed of several discrete regional variants still be Petersburg, Mossel Bay, Howiesen's Port, and so on all more or less contemporary and distinguished by a few fossils directors can now be seen to be excessively oversimplified. Middle Stone Age industries are better, therefore, regarded as the products of a steadily developing adaptation to biogeographically distinct regions or zones where the requirements and activities of the groups dictated the preferences and the extent to which the different raw materials for artifacts might be used. An understanding of the relative importance to the group of these different materials, wood, stone, bone, horn, and so on, can best be obtained from a comparison of paleoecological data with those obtained from site catchment analysis studies. 15. The assemblage of informal stone tools does not necessarily indicate dimness, nor does the refined stone tool assemblage represent superiority. Stone artifacts alone can only provide a minimal amount of information concerning the behavior of the makers. It is the association of these artifacts with all other surviving products and features of a single occupation that is significant. Fewer features are known from Middle Stone Age sites than from those of Acheulean and earlier times. We have evidence of hearth from the Cave of Hearth, and the discrete scatter of artifacts associated with hearth on single horizons is well documented at Montague Cave. The stone foundations of several small wine breaks are known from Orange I site, and evidence of a single large screened activity area at Zircoagat 27 in the Orange River scheme area. The piling of bones from one or more successful hunts has been recovered from the Busvaldi site at Kelkbank in the central Transvaal, and there is evidence from Lion's Cave in Swaziland that hematite began to be extracted for pigment as early as 28,000 years ago. Anvils wedged in position for flaking stone are present on the rubble horizons at the Kalambo Falls dating from about 27,000 years BP, where also small circles of stones may delineate former hearth, while the sparse scatter of artifacts from a single camp of Bamda industry hunters has been found on the Nata River in Botswana. Fossil remains representing food waste show that it was mostly the larger game animals that were the sources of supply, and some, such as buffalo, wildebeest, hartebeest, zebra and pig were among the commonest species carried back to the living sites. In general, there appears to be a rather greater 15. Site catchment analysis is a method developed by Vita Finzi and Higgs 1970 to establish the resource potential of a region exploited from a given prehistoric site. This calls for identification of the limits of the territory and of the extent to which the habitat and biome differ from those of the present day. Vita Finzi and E. S. Higgs, Prehistoric Economy in the Mount Carmel Area of Palestine, Site Catchment Analysis, Proc. O.J. The Pres. Social, 36, 1970, pages 1 to 37. 518. Prehistory in Southern Africa. Range of species represented on Middle Stone Age and on Acheulean sites. The evidence suggests, however, that, while better hunting weapons appear to have led to more efficient hunting, the bag remained a very varied one, only assuming the more selective character with the Late Stone Age. In sum, no longer can the so-called Middle Stone Age occurrences be looked upon as a simple progression towards a more refined or evolved technology from beginning to end, but rather, if the dating is correct, they show several different techniques with an essentially economic basis. These interact to varying degrees and may change as the economy changes. The different variants that have been identified probably reflect regional resource and extraction preferences, though most of these variants remain to be precisely defined. Within some regions, certain stratified sites, e.g. the Cave of Hearts, exhibit a clear developmental sequence, while at others, e.g. Classes River on the South African south coast and Zambipeta Cave, Zimbabwe, the stratigraphy succession shows a pattern not unlike that of the Mousterian traditions in western France, and different group occurrences may follow each other in no apparently consistent pattern. MMO circumflex accent I. A/A. Figure 20.10 Middle Stone Age industry from Twins River, typical of the Brachystegia woodlands of Zambia after J. D. Clark, 1970, dated between 32,000 and 22,000 years BP. 1. Angled scraper. 2. Utilized flake from diminutive disc corn. 3. Convergent scraper. 4. Convergent scraper with point missing. 5. Diminutive side scraper. 6. 7. Bifacial heavy-duty tools. 8. Hand axe 3 shirt. 8 Dolanty, all others quartz. 519. 6U circumflex accent 1J / V registered trademark $**. Figure 20. 1 Middle Stone Age artifacts from Whitcrone's Cave, typical of the equipment of hunters in the Karoo/Kalahari Thornfeldy after J. D. Clark, 1971, all in shirt, except number 6 in shale. 1 and 2. Unifacial points. 3. Utilized blade. 4, 6 and 7. Single side scrapers. 5. Burin on. Truncation. 8. Bend scraper. 9. Levia hot flake. 10. Levallois corn. 520. Figure 20.12 Tools of the Middle Stone Age Lupin Band Industrial Complex from Calambo Falls, associated with Brachystegia woodland and evergreen forest after J. D. Clark, 1970. Rubble 1. Site B, 1956. 1. Single concave side scraper chert. 2. Denticulate, convergent and nosed scraper chert. 3. Compact point chert. 4. Dihedral. Burint silkrete. 5. Core axe chert. 6. Core scraper chert. 7. Chopper quartzite. 8. Lanceolate chert. 521. CR and _N 0 and then O degrees 0:T greater than O 9 O greater than X 0 O circumflex accent asterisk greater than X H asterisk C 01 O Figure 20.13 Distribution of utilized blades and blade fragments in relation to dolerite boulder structures on a living site at Orange Free State after C.G. Sampson, 1974. 522. 3 cm. Figure 20.14 Tools from Hauiason's port sites belonging to Group IV of the Middle Stone Age in southern Africa, found in a range of environments from Makia to parkland and dry woodland after C.G. Sampson, 974. 1, 2, 4, 5, backed crescents. 3, backed trapezium. 6, utilized levia/lots. Corn, 7, burin, 8, outliukale, 9, borer, 10, 13, bifacial points, 11, side scraper, 12, double side scraper. Specimens 2, 3 and J are from Haughey-Stewart, all others are from Tunnel Cave. 523. Methodology and African prehistory. These replacements of one group occurrence by another may have had an economic origin, reflecting ecological changes and so changed food preferences. There is some slight evidence to suggest that this was so, but we do not as yet have the detailed faunal analyses and pollen data to know whether such changes can be established as having occurred simultaneously over a wide biogeographical regions or whether they reflect only local changes in availability of food resources through time at a single site. While the Middle Stone Age of southern Africa is broadly contemporaneous with the Upper Paleolithic in Europe, its earlier stages, though very inadequately known, appear to be more generally contemporary with the Mousterian there the Jabrutae/Preordination in the Middle East. The Late Stone Age in southern Africa. The conventional picture of the Late Stone Age is one of industries of largely microlithic tools usually referred to as Wilton after the Cape site in the Western Cape Province, where the characteristic industries were first found and described, and a Smithfield scraper. Industries in the Lydianite area of the High Veld. In some parts of the subcontinent, however, what have come to be known as pre-Wilton industries have been recognized. These make their appearance shortly after 20,000 years ago and represent the radical change in the stone tool technology. The prepared core techniques of the Middle Stone Age are replaced by occurrences with informal cores and the irregular flakes struck from them. The only consistently formal tools appear to be various types of larger scraper, both flakes and steep scrapers, and several smaller, convex forms. Such occurrences are known from sites at the south coast, 16 from the Orange Free State, 17 the Transvaal, 18 and Namibia, 19 where the occurrence is associated with the butchery of 3 elephants. In Zimbabwe, the equivalent industry is the Poland one, which dates from ±940 and 12,200 BP. In particular, it is associated with extensive hearts of white ash and some of the first bone points belong to this time. A possible related occurrence from Leopard's Hill Cave in Zambia dates between 21,000 and 23,000 BP. Other as yet undated. 16. Nelson's Bay Cave, dating from 18,000 to 12,000 BP, Matjes River, dating from 11,250 to 10,500 BP, and Oakhurst. At Nelson's Bay Cave, an industry overlying the as yet unnamed steep scraper industry dates between 12,000 and 9,000 BP. The majority of the artifacts are large blade tools and there are no microlithic forms. A similar pre-Wilton industry is found at other sites in the southern mountain region, e.g. at Melhout Boom, where it dates from 10,500 ±190 years b. page 17. The Smithfield, e.g. Phase I industry from Zircoagat 13. 18. Utums, dating from 7680 b. page 19. Windhoek, dating from +10,000 BP. 524. Prehistory in southern Africa. Occurrences of this kind are known from Pondoland, Umgazana Cave, the Middle Zambezi Valley in Zambia, Lukanda and other regions. The HE distribution suggests that this radical, technological change may have been fairly general between about 20,000 and 9,000 years ago. Why it should have come about is unclear, but, again, this writer suspects that it may have been caused by a combination of the environmental changes believed to be recorded at a number of sites in southern Africa at this time, e.g. Nelson's Bay Cave, Zambakeda Cave, and so on, and the independent development or diffusion or more efficient equipment and techniques, in particular with respect to new hunting methods. There is some evidence to show that these pre-Wilton industries are associated with the exploitation of large ungulate fauna, hartebeest, wildebeest, blue antelope and quagga. In addition, at Nelson's Bay Cave, they appear to be associated with an ecological change shortly after 12,000 BP when the grassland flora were replaced by evergreen forest forms, and the appearance of a quantity of marine animals in the faunal remains indicates that the rise in sea level in the closing stages of the Pleistocene had made it possible to exploit seafoods directly from this cave. Small blade industries with a high percentage of microlithic backed forms are now seen to have made their appearance in South Central Africa much earlier than used at one time to be thought. One of the first of these is represented by the earliest stage of the Nakakuthan industrial complex Nakakufutai from Zambia, where the oldest date recorded is 16715 ± 95 BP. The HE local Wilton industry begins in Zimbabwe about 12,000 BP. Changala Cave and somewhat later in South Africa, e.g. 8,000 to 5,000 BP. These and other early occurrences in South-Central Africa are paralleled by fully microlithic backed blade industries from sites in East Africa. From Uganda, Munima Cave, Bulbuma Island, 14,480 ± 130 BP. From the Nakuru/Naivasha Rift in Kenya, Prolonged Rift, 13,300 ± 220 BP. And from central Tanzania, Kiziz Rock Shelter, 18,190 ± 300 BP. The related but regionally distinctive development was that of the Chitoline in the Zaire Basin, 12,970 ± 250 BP. The microlithic tradition is associated with the development of more efficient forms of composite tools, one of the most significant of which was the bow and arrow. It is not known when this weapon made its first appearance in Africa, probably during the closing stage of the Pleistocene, but of equal importance with the lunates and other small-backed forms of stone tool used for the heads of the arrows were the various forms of bone point and link shaft, also believed to be the heads of arrows. Some of these may be as old American Samoa 1 to 000 years BP. It is believed that development sequences can be recognized in these microlithic industries in many different parts of southern Africa, but, in other regions, as in the northwest of Zambia, the disc cord apparently continued until the second millennium before our era, while in other parts, e.g. the Orange Free State, the Wilton microlithic element seems to. 525. Methodology and African Prehistory. 9*. Figure 20.15 Tools of the later Stone Age Wilton complex after J. D. Clark, 1970. 1-12, of Chert and Chalcedony, Cape Province, South Africa after M. C. Burkett, 1928. 1-3, short and scrappers. 4, 5, straight-backed microliths. 6, all. 7-9, lunates. 10, 11, double crescents. 12, ostrich eggshell beads. 3, 4, 12 from Wilton Rock Shelter, others from the Cape Flats. 13-20, Matopan equals Rhodesian Wilton industry tools from a Madzima Cave, Matapo Hills, Zimbabwe after C. K. Cook and K. R. Robinson, 1954. 13, spatula bone ball. 14, bone point with beveled butt. 75, link shaft. 16-19, lunates and decrescents. Quartz. 20, slate pendant. Disappeared and to be replaced later by scraper-dominated industries. Smithfield B. There are many more late Stone Age than Middle Stone Age sites known, and there is reason to believe that was the early Holocene was a period of population increase. From this time also, i.e. about 10,000 BP onwards, caves and rock shelters began to be more extensively occupied. Local resources were exploited more intensively than previously, and formal assemblages found at occupation sites show that greater emphasis was now placed on the hunting or trapping of specific animals. The pattern of exploitation was probably not greatly different from that of the Kalahari San and other hunter-gatherers in the dry tropics today. The movements and range of a group would have been regulated by the seasonal availability of water, plant and animal resources, and regular interaction between neighboring groups is to be expected. Those living. 526. Prehistory in Southern Africa. ?/m and rm. Millimeters, wh. 4. Figure 20.16 Crescent adds flame or scraper in shirt, mounted in mastic, with rhino horn handle, from a cave at Plettenberg Bay, Eastern Cape Province, South Africa after J. D. Clark, 970. Within range of freshwater sources and the sea now exploited the fish, shellfish and aquatic mammal fauna. Others concentrated on the huge herds of antelope and others again on small game. In the interior southern mountain region of the Cape Province, the commonest forms of stone tools are small scrapers of various kinds, and the food waste is mostly from smaller mammals, perhaps secured by trapping and snaring. On the other hand, in Zimbabwe, Zambia and elsewhere in the grasslands and woodlands, the industries contain large numbers of microlithic lunates and backed blades associated with the food waste of large mammals. These tools suggest that the chief weapon was most probably the bow and arrow. the microliths being hafted singly or in pairs to form the broad cutting heads, similar to the dynastic Egyptian and the few historic sand-arrows of this type that have survived. Territorial ranges of the bands would have depended upon a number of different ecological factors, but in the Western Cape Province d'Angen it has been shown that the late prehistoric sand groups spent the winter at the coast, living mostly from seafoods, and the summer in the 527. Methodology and African prehistory. Mountains about 140 kilometers inland, where the diet consisted of various plant foods, hyrax, tortoises and other small game. The late Stone Age hunter-gatherers in the highly favorable regions of southern Africa occupied some of the richest natural resource areas of plant and animal foods in the world. Where resources for hunters were virtually inexhaustible, as here, there must have been plenty of opportunity for indulging intellectual interests, some of which are manifest in the magnificent rock art of the Drakensberg Mountains, Zimbabwe and Namibia. While much of the art may not be more than 2,000 to 3,000 years old, it nevertheless provides an incomparable record of the way of life of these prehistoric hunter-gatherers, which, in many respects, is perpetuated today in the life of the San of the Central Kalahari. The origins of this art are clearly also of considerable antiquity, and the earliest paintings yet known from southern Africa come from the Apollo 11 rock shelter in Namibia, where they occur on rock slabs in a horizon dated to 28,000 years BP. In the first few centuries of our era, the late Stone Age hunting-gathering populations were replaced over much of southern Africa by agricultural peoples with a knowledge of metallurgy. These populations are most likely to have been an advance guard of Bantu-speaking groups that migrated into the subcontinent from a homeland somewhere, it is thought, in the northwest Chad and Cameroon. There is, therefore, in southern Africa no evidence of a Neolithic stage of culture, by which is implied that there were no food-producing peoples making pottery but using only stone tools, in particular ground and polished axes. It is, however, necessary to qualify this by saying that, while there is no evidence for the cultivation of any plants before the coming of the early Iron Age peoples, it is quite certain that some of the late Stone Age groups in the southwest had acquired sheep and, later, cattle, at least by the 1st century before our era, and almost certainly earlier. Yes, so many of these people can be identified with the historic Khoi and were nomadic pastoralists who grew no crops but who made a distinctive kind of pottery. No certainly identified pastoral occupation sites have yet been excavated, however, so our knowledge of these groups must be drawn from historic sources and not yet from archaeology. There is also debate as to whence they obtained their stock. Some suggest, on linguistic data, that it was from Eastern and Central Sudanic speakers. Others favor early Iron Age migrants. Whatever the original source, this pastoral phase can hardly have begun before about 300 before our era at the earliest, and it came to an end in the 18th century of our era. The record provided by prehistoric studies in southern Africa shows, therefore, the high interior plateau lands to have played the leading part in the evolution of the tool maker. The increasing ingenuity and efficiency with which succeeding hominid populations developed patterns of behavior and the cultural equipment with which to exploit ever more intensively the resources of these ecosystems in which they lived helped to 528. Prehistory in Southern Africa. Explain the racial and cultural differences that distinguish the indigenous peoples of Southern Africa today. San, Khoi, Burgstamus, over J. Imba, TW and Bantu, as well as demonstrating the great antiquity and continuity of many behavioral traits which still persist up to the present time. 529. The Prehistory of Central Africa. Part I.R.D. Bell determines introduction. Geographically, the Zaire Basin extends from the Gulf of Guinea in the west to the Great Lakes Zone in the east, and approximately from the ith parallel south of the equator in Angola and Shab-ex-Katanga to the watershed of the hydrography basins of the Chad and the Zaire. In the north, it lies mainly in the equatorial zone, and its plant cover consists of some of the densest forest to be found in Africa. This forest zone is known to have extended much farther north during certain very wet periods than it does at present. In the course of thousands of years the forest has retreated, and now exists only in galleries of varying width along the rivers. We emphasize the importance of this plant cover because it has been of the first importance in the development of prehistoric cultures in this region. It is thought, in the light of recent research, that prehistoric cultures, and, it seems, more particularly those coming after the Acheulean, developed locally, conditioned by the primeval forest and without any contact with the inhabitants of zones where the vegetation was less dense. In the north, the great Neolithic migrations moving from east to west skirted the forest without penetrating it, as if it were a formidable barrier and a world into which peoples accustomed to living in the savanna and wide open spaces did not venture. Nothing in the industries of the Middle and Upper Paleolithic, nor in the Neolithic, nor in cave art, which was moreover uncommon in the Zaire Basin, gives ground for belief that there were contacts with the peoples living in a Sahara which was not then the Great Arid Desert. We know today to find traces of contacts. We must turn to the east and south of Africa, where the starting point of the migrations of the human groups which peopled the great equatorial forest in the west must likewise be sought. The term Central Africa is taken to include the following countries: Zaire, Central African Republic, People's Republic of Congo and Gabon, and parts of Angola, Rwanda and Burundi. The prehistory of Central Africa. In the Quaternary, the Zaire Basin would seem to have had a climate very similar to that of East Africa, allowing for local variations due to the high altitude of the mountain regions. According to G. Mortelmann's 1952, there were 4 pluvial and 2 humid periods: Nataran, 2nd humid Michaeline, East humid Gamblion, 4th pluvial Kanjaran, 3rd pluvial Kamajan, 2nd pluvial Kagaran, East pluvial 2. The settlement of people depended to some extent on these alternations of relatively dry periods with periods of high rainfall, which modified what is now called the environment. The fact that the forest was dense and therefore difficult to penetrate has led several prehistorians to think that this zone was thinly populated from the lower Paleolithic to the Neolithic periods. We do not share this opinion, and the myth about the difficulty of peopling this region should be abandoned. If relatively few stone tools have been found, it is because research workers have hesitated to undertake lengthy investigations under difficult conditions. The results obtained recently by several expeditions in Angola, the Central African Republic and Zaire, and the large number of flaked stones they have collected indicate that the tropical forest was as thickly populated as other parts of Africa in prehistoric times. Finally, it should be noted that in the humid equatorial zone the acidity of the soils impedes the preservation of organic remains. Consequently, human fossils, remains of fauna and bone tools are not found, with very rare exceptions which, moreover, relate to very recent, even historical, periods. History of research. The prehistory of the equatorial forest of the Congo Basin remained unknown for a long time because of its extremely thick vegetation and 2. Nataran, humid phase, named after the deposits of the terrace below the 102-meter limit at Lake Nakuru in Kenya. Michaeline, humid phase, recognized in the 114-meter and 102-meter terraces at Lake Nakuru. Gamblion, 4th pluvial, identified around Lake Nakuru, Naivaha, and especially element Ida Gamble's cave in Kenya. Catron, 3rd pluvial, named by L.S.B. Leakey after a fossil-bearing deposit discovered at Kanjaran on the Kavirondo Gulf. Kamajan, 2nd pluvial, which owes its name to the diatomite deposits studied by Gregory at Kamazia in the Kenya Rift Valley. Kagaran, 1st pluvial, so named after a system of terraces on the river Kagera in Tanzania, discovered by E. J. Wayland in 1934. 531. Table 21. Climatic variations and prehistoric industries of the Congo Basin after G. Mortelmann's 7952. KAMASIAN, 2nd pluvial. East pluvial. Benakaduran valley floor gravels Chitoline and Amakadlin wine-born reddening. GAMVLIAN/low terraces 3rd pluvial arid red wine-born sense mixed clay Ifera Cretaceous final Ashuline. Neolithic facies Wiltonian I. Butamban. Idea Cochin _ I advanced Galenian.I. Galenian. I advanced Magosian I1 Magosian I still by Ant. Mousterian type facies. Smithfield. Tiazic and upper Ashuline. Middle Ashuline. Lower Ashulian Shaline. Old Owen. Advanced Coffin. Coffin. Claptonian. 532. Lijo UQ asterisk him joy UMO joy oi to vi exig vertical line asterisk camp vertical line mute P joy I8 I till SI equals pounds T 1 Bill 13 asterisk 11 list Del HI asterisk N I circumflex accent LEIL IGISSI 533. Methodology and African prehistory. Because of the massive laterite formations in which the industries of several prehistoric civilizations were deeply embedded, the first attempts to study its prehistory had to wait until major public works were undertaken. The construction of railway lines, roads, bridges and sanitary canals, and the region was prospected for its mineral deposits, for then geologists and prehistorians had access to geological levels in which stone tools might be found. In Zaire, the first sporadic discoveries of prehistoric tools seem to have been made by Comandancy Zboyinski when the railway lines were being built. These finds were studied in 1899 by X. Steiner, who made tentative conclusions despite the absence of stratigraphy data. From 1927 to 1938 research developed and important work was done, in particular by J. Colette, F. Cabot, E. Polinard, M. Bessie Queard, G. Mortelmans, Red. P. Anciens de Favorx and Abbe H. Brave. The most recent work is that of H. Van Moorsel, F. Van Noten and D. Cohen, who are all engaged on further research. Less work has been published on the People's Republic of the Congo, whose territory lies mainly in the forest zone. Mention should be made, however, of the research and studies of J. Babbitt, R.L. Duis, G. Drow, H. Kelly, J. Lombard and P.L. Roy, which relate particularly to the discoveries made along the railway line running from Pointe to Brazzaville. The prehistory of Gabon is known through the work of G. U. D. Bulchan, B. Farine, B. Blancoff and Y. Pomerat, but there again our knowledge is rather limited and no firm stratigraphy conclusions have been reached. The first investigations made in the Central African Republic were conducted by Professor Lacroix, who discovered prehistoric tools in the alluvial deposits of the Muka Plateau rivers towards 1930. These results were published in 1933 by Abbe H. Brave, and in the same year Felix About drew attention to some stone tools unearthed in the course of various public works. From 1966 to 1968 R. D. Bell de Hermans was able to carry out systematic research which gave a fairly exact idea of the prehistoric industries of a region where practically nothing had previously been found. Little was known about the prehistory of Cameroon until very recent years, and W.E. had to wait for the work of N. David, J. Hervé and A. Marlac to give us the first general picture of the situation in a part of Africa which archaeologically is still to be fully explored. Research in Angola is associated with the names of J. Jangmert, H. Brave and J. D. Clark, who took as their hunting ground the rich alluvial deposits of the diamond workings. Chronological basis for this section W.E. shall use the chronology of the Quaternary era. 534. The Prehistory of Central Africa. Figure 2I. Central Africa. Places mentioned in the text. Established by G. Mortelmans 1955 to 7 f° Artini Zaire Basin, which is the most acceptable one in the light of present knowledge. Figure 21.1. The Kagaran pluvial. This seems to be the most important of the four successive pluvials. It was a period of intensive valley excavation and in which very old gravel terraces containing the oldest industries of the Zaire Basin were formed. These industries, consisting almost entirely of roughly worked pebbles, are classified as pre-Lower Schuline G. Mortelmans Kafwan. A long-harried. 535. Mixed forests, secondary forests, savanna and bush woodlands, dry mixed woodland, forest and steppe grassland, hill forests and plateau grassland. V, dry dense forest. Mahalut. Small areas of dense, dry forest. Steppe grassland. Temperate mountain forest. Semi-desert. And desert. Mangroves. Swamps 0 500 kilometers. Figure 21.2 Central Africa. Vegetation zones. 536. The prehistory of Central Africa. Period followed the Kagaran pluvial and the old terraces were covered with a thick mantle of laterite. Here pre-Acheulean industry has been found which is lacking in chronological definition owing to the lack of stratigraphy evidence. The Kamajan pluvial. This pluvial occurred at the final stage of the Lower Pleistocene and lasted for the whole of the Middle Pleistocene. It consisted of two phases separated by a drier period. In the Kasai Basin the 30-meter and 22-meter terraces date back to this period. in Shaba and, it seems, in the west of the Central African Republic it is represented by gravel terraces, valley floors and fossil beds of streams. During this pluvial in regions with moderate relief, some riverbeds were entirely filled in and the water then cut out a new course. In the lower strata of these fossil riverbeds, pre-Acheulean tools have been found which are more highly developed than those discovered in the old Kagaran terraces. A few bifacial artifacts begin to appear but they too are difficult to date with any certainty. After the climax of the Comogon pluvial the roughly flamed pebble industries were superseded by the lower Acheulean. This lower Acheulean still comprised many flamed stone artifacts but new tools began to appear, bifacial implements and hand axes in particular. The He ladder, rather rare to begin with, soon came to occupy an important place among the tools of this civilization. The first Comogon climax was followed by a moderately dry phase in the course of which new laterite formations developed, slopes crumbled and river silt was deposited. A Middle Acheulean industry is associated with this period. Its artifacts were generally made by flaking, usually from the side of a core by what is called the Victoria Westite technique. 3. With the second Comogon climax, for which was less pronounced than the first, new gravels were deposited and the 15-meter terraces of the Kasai were laid down. The Henew dry period resulted in new laterite formations. The Acheulean industry continued to evolve with a new flaking technique known as Victoria West 11, and the development of a new tool, the pick, which was to occupy a prominent place among the objects produced by post-Acheulean industries in the forest zone. The post-Comogon arid period is the most important known in this region. The Sahara spread southwards and the Kalahari Desert northwards. Some writers believe that the equatorial forest practically disappeared, only surviving in narrow belts of woodland. Red desert sand accumulated in layers, sometimes of considerable depth. The Acheulean industry died out. 3. A name be given to two levallois flaking techniques observed especially in the industries discovered in the vicinity of the Victoria Falls on the Zambezi. 4. SOME writers hold this second Comogon climax to be the Kandaron. This gives 4 humid periods instead of 3, including one with 2 quite distinct phases. 537. Methodology and African prehistory. Or rather it seemed to develop locally into the New industry called the Sangoan, particularly in equatorial Africa and the forest zones. Tools were transformed. Hand axes became rare and finally disappeared. Bifacial artifacts became thicker and more massive. Picks abounded and new tools totally unknown in the Acheulean period made their appearance, long bifaces of large size. These tools would seem to be suited to forest life. This conclusion is not, however, consistent with the environment in which the Sangoan developed. If it is assumed that the equatorial forest had practically disappeared by the post-Comogon arid period from which this industry is dated, it must be recognized that at present the Sangoan is one of the African industries about which we know very little. The Gambleon pluvial. In the course of the Gambleon pluvial the equatorial forest was reconstituted, the rivers hollowed out valleys and deposited silt which formed low terraces, this silt being composed of the wine-borne sands accumulated during the preceding arid period. In western Zaire and Kasai, the Sangoan tended to develop into a new and less massive industry known as the Lukemban, which was also regarded as a forest culture. In the southeastern regions, industries akin to those of South Africa and Kenya developed. Characterized by flanks and blades with Mousterian features, and denoted Middle Stone Age, they are as difficult to identify typologically as stratigraphically, stratigraphical evidence being frequently non-existent. Post-Gambleon humid phases, the Macaline and Nakaran. These two periods were much less extreme than the pluvials which preceded them. They were separated by a short dry phase and the Nakaran is not very clearly differentiated in the Zaire basin. In the Macaline the rivers followed out shallow beds and these were, then filled in again. The Lukemban industry evolved locally, the tools becoming smaller and smaller while chisels and arrowheads became very numerous in the Châteaulin, which was a culture of hunters. In eastern Zaire, Shab and Angola, several aspects characteristic of the late Stone Age developed. This assemblage should be thoroughly re-examined, for it embraces several different and seemingly incompatible industries which cannot, at present, be fitted into a definite place in the chronological sequence. During and after the Nakaran humid period, Neolithic industries, including the Châteaulin, spread over the whole of equatorial Africa, where they seem to have lasted much longer than they did elsewhere. The Copper and Iron Ages did not penetrate into this relatively inaccessible region until a much later date, which again tends to indicate that its prehistoric cultures developed locally. 538. The Prehistory of Central Africa. The prehistoric industries of the Zaire Basin. Pre-Acheulean industries. Very early prehistoric industries consisting of worked pebbles are to be found in practically the whole of the Zaire Basin. They are generally buried under old laterites as in the Upper Kafala Basin in Zaire, and in the laterite formations of the Salo Plateau and Upper Songhai in the Central African Republic, where they are also encountered in the deep alluvial deposits of fossil riverbeds. In Angola they exist in the deep beds of coarse alluvial deposits found in many great rivers. These ancient prehistoric cultures, usually known as Pebble or earlier Stone Age cultures, bear various names according to the localities where they were found or to the prehistorians who reported them first. In point of fact, they are all part of a slow evolution of flaking techniques which lasted nearly 2 million years. Kafue, and the eponymous site is in the Kafue Valley in Uganda. This industry was discovered by E.J. Wayland in 1919 and consists of river pebbles from which tree flanks were struck off in 3 directions or, very rarely, in one only, to make a crude cutting tool. Today the Kafuan is subdivided into 4 stages: Archaic Kafuan, Early Kafuan, Late Kafuan and Advanced Kafuan. Traces of these 4 stages are found at Ansong GC in the south of Uganda in 82 and 61 meter terraces. The Advanced Kafuan is very close or even identical to the Old Owen. Some prehistorians hold that was the early stages of the Kafuan cannot be regarded as evidence of human workmanship and that the chipped pebbles were produced by natural processes. OLDOWA, and the eponymous site is at Oldaway in the Serengeti Plain in Tanzania. It was discovered by Kutwinkle in 1911 and became famous in 1926 because of the researches and finds of LSB. Leakey. The Oldaway Gorge cuts deeply through the deposits of a lake which once existed during the Middle and Upper Pleistocene periods. 11 Acheulean levels have been identified above the pre-Acheulean level constituting the Old Owen. The Old Owen is an industry of artifacts made with river pebbles, most of which are less flat than the Kafuan ones. Flaking was more highly developed and the curved cutting edge was obtained by working alternate sides. In the final stage of this industry, the pebbles were shaped to a point which is an early forerunner of the bifacial artifacts of later cultures. The Old Owen industry has been found in Shab, in the west of the Central African Republic in the Upper Songhai alluvial deposits, and it seems to have existed in the northeast of Angola. On the other hand, although a few widely scattered. 539. Methodology and African prehistory. Specimens of roughly worked pebbles have been found in Cameroon, Gabon and the People's Republic of the Congo. This industry has not been identified with any certainty in the 3 last mentioned countries bordering on the Gulf of Guinea. The Acheulean industry. Acheulean culture is particularly well represented in the Zaire Basin, and some alluvial terrace deposits are exceptionally rich in artifacts. The division of the Acheulean into 4 stages, or 5, according to which author is consulted, is chiefly a matter of classifying different flaking and retouching techniques. The distinctions are more typological than stratigraphical. The Acheulean deposits are found mainly in the alluvium of early water courses, which formed terraces, in the gravels and sands of valley floors, and in the fossil beds of streams which have changed course. Consequently, the industries are not found in their place of origin. Running water has moved and accumulated them, and in the process they have become worn. Consequently, the study of the Acheulean artifacts of these deposits is based chiefly on typology and not on stratigraphy, as it is at Oldaway, where the lake deposits containing the industries are some 4 meters deep. The Acheulean industry was characterized by a fairly wide range of tools which were much more developed than in the pre-Acheulean cultures. Work pebbles continued to be used, but they became rarer as the industry progressed without, however, disappearing entirely. NEW tools assumed great importance, first of all the biface, which, as the name indicates, was made of a pebble flanked on both sides. It was oval or pear-shaped, with a more or less sharp point. The base was often rounded, the section usually lentiform, and the dimensions were very variable. Another important tool was the cleaver, snapped from a flank and with a cutting opposite the base. In addition there were picks, not very numerous during the lower and middle Acheulean periods but very plentiful in the final stage of this culture. As well as these for tools, many varieties of flakes of very different sizes were used untrimmed or were retouched to form side scrapers, bend scrapers and other less refined tools such as the notched implements. There are 5 subdivisions of the Acheulean based on typology and working techniques. Acheulian termed Abbevillin or early Chellian by some writers. The tools comprise very large flakes made from blocks of stone by percussion on a striking platform. These Claptonian flakes were sometimes used untrimmed, but were usually transformed into bifaces and cleavers, heavy, massive tools with markedly curved cutting edges. Pebble flaking did not disappear. On the contrary, we note that this pre-Acheulean skill. 540. The prehistory of Central Africa was perfected, for some of the so-called unworked base bifaces are the finest specimens of flaked pebbles. This stage is represented in Shab in the Kmboa and Luna deposits discovered by Fr. Kabut. Examples also come from northern Angola, where they have been found in the Lumbe Basin. Some deposits in the west of the Central African Republic also belong to this stage. The Acheulean tools recovered from alluvial terrace deposits or fossil riverbeds are very often found to have been worn by the action of the water. This is particularly typical of the Lepose and Liebank deposits in the Central African Republic. Acheulian late Abbevillin or lower Acheulian. This industry is very like the preceding one, and is equally found in the gravels of the rivers of Angola and Shab, but the tools are less water-worn and, above all, the secondary flaking is more finished than is the case with the Acheulean tools. The edges of bifaces and of hand axes are straighter, apparently as a result of reworking with a flaking tool of soft material such as wood or bone. Acheulian middle Acheulian. The tools of this stage are found near the surface of the gravels of the Luna and the Kmbo where they are incorporated in river silts. At this period the real revolution occurred in working techniques, namely the preparation of a core with a view to obtaining large flakes. This technique, well known in southern Africa, is called Victoria West. It marks the beginning of a proto-Levallois technique. The preparatory work on the core produced a multifaceted striking platform. The flake was removed laterally and then carefully retouched to make a biface, a cleaver, or a side scraper. The flaking was done with a soft percussion implement. The tools are very regular and symmetrical and the side edges are practically straight. The side edges of the cleavers have been trimmed to make them lozenge-shaped in section. Acheulian upper Acheulian. At this stage, working techniques remained basically the same but were improved Victoria West technique. The core was much rounder, with a faceted striking platform from which large curved flakes were removed. They had the narrow base instead of the very wide base characteristic of the Victoria West technique. The flakes were used to make tools, bifaces, side scrapers and cleavers, which were all very carefully retouched. The section of the hand axis is trapezoidal or lentiform. This upper Acheulean industry is found at Kmboa in silts of the Comogon age and in the 15-meter terraces of the Cassie. Acheulian. The advanced and finally Acheulian. The final Acheulean stage saw the beginning of a cultural change which introduced regional forms better adapted to the climatic and vegetational environment. At this time human settlements developed on the now dry. 541. Methodology and African prehistory. Middle and low terraces. The Levallois technique began to be used as well as the earlier techniques. Otherwise the tools varied little from those of the preceding stages, except for a general improvement, more finished work in particular, and for the appearance of very large bifaces and cleavers, some of which were over 30 centimeters long. One tool greatly developed during this period was a pick. It was robust and heavy, triangular or trapezoidal in section, and was perhaps intended for use with large oblong bifaces for woodworking. It is thus a forerunner of the Sangoan complex. We also find stone balls perfectly shaped and comparable to the South American bolus. A particularly large collection of these balls was discovered in the Mangala River deposits in the west of the Central African Republic. This final Acheulean industry is found in Shab, Kamoa and around Kalina in Zaire. It is also represented in Angola, perhaps around Brazzaville and, in the Central African Republic, in the rich deposits of the Anjoair River in Upper Songhai. Unfortunately, nothing is known about the people of this culture, for no organic remains have been preserved in any part of the Zaire Basin owing to the acidity of its soils.